The Living Zen-podcast is a gift from the members and associates of the Victoria Zen Centre to you. If you enjoy it, please be sure to let your friends know about Living Zen. If you'd like to support our community, here are a few ways that you can do it. Download the Living Zen podcast app for iPod, iPhone, or Android. You can also purchase additional Zen Talks by Venerable Eshu on iTunes or Amazon.com. One of the most meaningful ways to show your support is by joining our Sangha as an associate. Your commitment of $10 a month will ensure that offerings like the Living Zen podcast and our online Zendo will continue to be available around the world to everyone with an interest in truly living Zen. To become an associate, please visit our website at www.zenwest.ca and click on the membership tab. Thank you for your support.
I had to jump up there in the first sit to turn the baseboard heaters off. I had this sort of wave of heat come up my back and went, oh, wow, the legend of how Eshu, burst into flames. This sounds really good, but I've got a few more years I'd like to keep going before that legend is born. So, welcome, Matt. This is your first sit. And as I was just sitting this morning and kind of being with what was going on, what I wanted to talk about this morning is the form and emptiness. That makes sense to talk about on a Sunday Zendo. And how those two things manifest or are sort of done, explored in the form of Zen that we use. Because we can chant and read the Heart Sutra, which talks about form is emptiness, emptiness is form. But we in Zen practice really want to get beyond the philosophical, intellectual, conceptual realm. Beyond just wanting to get beyond it. If we're going to practice Zen, it's crucial. Zen is getting beyond this conceptual framework. In our tradition, we practice something called koans, which is the investigation of these cases, the cases of the master, of which the first one is Joshu's mu. And in this first case, it talks about, if you can't get beyond this conceptual framework, you're not getting beyond this first barrier. So we can say we're not really even practicing Zen yet. So this is an important thing. We can understand Buddhist philosophy. We can really grasp and enjoy and love the teachings of the Buddha and this sort of philosophical framework that we call Buddhism or Zen. But a better understanding doesn't necessarily lead us anywhere. Most of us have an understanding that eating food that's too high in sugar is bad for us, or smoking cigarettes is bad for us, and I always used to say this, go up to a smoker and ask them if they know that smoking is bad for them. It's rare to find one that says, oh, really? I had no idea. Oh, stupid me, I'll just stop. We all know lots of things. And yet how we practice, how we go about living our lives is really based on something else. And that something else is what's really interesting, or what we sort of look to or investigate or deconstruct in our Zen practice. So if we start with just a real early teaching of the Buddha, perhaps the earliest teaching of the Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth is that life, our experience, there is in life this thing that the Buddha called dukkha. dissatisfaction, anguish. And so a lot of people translate this first noble truth as life is suffering. And that's not actually accurate. The first noble truth is dukkha, that experience itself, that there is this fundamental existential ick, is what I like to call it. It's this feeling that follows us around as we go through life. And regardless of the situation that we find ourselves in, if we find ourselves in the most wonderful relationship, in the most wonderful situation or circumstances, it is this kind of shadow that follows us into that, which as soon as we arrive, after just a breath or two of saying, this is great, it's this shadow that says, yeah, but it's not going to last. And we go, oh, I've got to find something better. And the second noble truth is that there is a cause. There is a cause for this. Something causes this ick. And this is something that we take very seriously in Zen practice. The other two noble truths, that there is a way to go about releasing yourself from this suffering. And the fourth one, which is that the way is this fourfold noble path, or this eightfold noble path, sorry, 4 more folds than I first mentioned. They kind of come out of this second noble, or as Stephen Batchelor puts it, which I quite like, ennobling truth. Grasping these or penetrating these teachings is what makes us noble, worthy of respect. And I could go on about that whole thing, because, anyways. So this cause, tanha, craving, desire. The desire to be with the things that we think will make us complete or comfortable or happy, satisfied, fulfilled. But simultaneously, it is the desire as well to be away from things that we find unpleasant, uncomfortable, that we think will diminish us, rob us. And so we have to change our, or sort of alter our perspective of what desire means. Because the way that I think most of us, certainly I understood, craving or desire, was always a sort of bringing inness, wanting, hunger. But from the perspective of the Dharma teaching, it is this, how can I put it? It is the feeling that something needs to be done, that somehow things as they are not complete, or not perfectly balanced, or not sort of whole, and that something needs to be done. And sometimes that is bringing something that we perceive as being outside in. Or sometimes it is the activity of taking something that we perceive as being inside and pressing it out. And both of these are desires, craving, want, something to do. And this drives us deeper into the practice of Buddhism or Zen. Because what's that about? Where does that come from? This idea of good and bad, inside and outside. Where does this idea of pure and impure and right and wrong and complete and incomplete come from? And this is the sort of fundamental sort of target, we could say, that we take up in practice. Now, the Dharma teaches that this division is of crucial importance. That somewhere along the way arise these experiences, sensory awarenesses that bind together. In the Heart Sutra and in Buddhist philosophy generally, they're called the skandhas, the 5 skandhas. Form, geez, I don't want to have to go to my book here. Anyways, I don't even need to get into them, actually. 5 sense perceptions, form, sensation, okay, I will. Part of the trouble is that I've learned like 5 different versions of this, so. Form, sensation, perception, dispositions, and consciousness. That these things bubble up and they're responding to other things that are bubbling up. And we collect them together and we sort of package them up into this thing called a self or an I. And as many I's as there are in this world, there are as many sort of rights and wrongs. Goods and bads and pures and impures and insides and outside. And what's inside of you I can take as being outside of me. And Buddhism teaches us that fundamentally this is just an illusion. This is just a way that we perceive things as having an inside and outside. We take what is fundamentally unblemished sort of fabric, whole fabric, and sort of cut it up into little parcels. And we do this, at first we think that that's how we identify and protect ourselves. And there's truth to this. But when we take it as being the sort of fundamental nature of things, the baseline of things, that things are somehow fundamentally unconnected, we start to run into all kinds of problems. We start to forget about our true nature, our home, where we have come from. And this is a koan, this is a question in Zen. Where did you come from? What is your original face? Before your parents were born, who are you? And all of these koans, all of these questions point us back to before we made up, before we constructed and attached to, fixated all of these distinctions and separations inside and outside. Where did we come from? What is our nature? Because it's the position of Buddhism, Zen, that at no point in our existence are we separate, are we actually separate from our home. Much like waves rising on the ocean, we can identify ourselves and each other. We can talk about qualities and characteristics, direction. But we can also see that at our root, the basis, we are not separate from the origin. And by not any of us being separate from our origin, we are not separate from one another, or any object, or anything in this vast cosmos. Now, wonder of wonders, as our tremendous intellects in sciences go forward, more and more, this is the same conclusion that physicists are coming to. And yet, we can know this. And this is the important piece, the important thing that I want to sort of point to today, is that all of the science, and even some of these great physicists who have seen these things with their own eyes, seen these functions in the universe around them, seen the patterns of interconnectedness all around them, this habit of perceiving the world as being separate is very deeply rooted. So much so that we can have all the evidence in the world through our eyes and in our minds. Everything is totally connected. And yet we can go through our lives, and the actions that we take, the way that we make relationship, the way that we interact with objects and environments, our world at large, when we look at it, is based on a perception which is me and you, separate, inside and out, good and bad, right and wrong, have, want, need to be rid of. So the practice that we engage in Zen is aimed directly at that root fixation, I. Because the truth is that all of the external evidence can be mounted up. We can understand it completely. We can see for ourselves that this is the way that things are, and yet we can still continue to behave as if we're fundamentally separate. And this is called delusion. I used to work in mental health and addiction services, and this was one of the most fascinating symptoms of schizophrenia that I heard, was this delusion. I said, "What's delusion?" And he said, "It is a fixed false belief in spite of evidence to the contrary." And I said, "Oh, that's really good. I like that." And this is how we so often live. So when we come to practice in this form, in this Zendo, we try to aim everything that we're doing at that root, which is within our own perception, which is within our own selves, this thing that we call a self, hanging on to ourselves. And everything that we do, the form that we use, the way that we interact with one another, it's all aimed at that, at both pointing us at that so that we can see where it is that we're fixated, as well as sort of having us open up, let go of it for a second. What happens when in an activity that we're engaged in, we just for a breath, just for a moment, let go of that grip we have on the idea or the collection of skandhas that we call ourselves. What happens when just for a second we open up and experience what's going on without that self-created illusion. So we have a lot of things. So one of the things that we have to understand, we've got some sort of neuroscience people, is the subtlety of mind. The mind that we have is amazingly refined and subtle. We can make all kinds of sort of mirrors, set up all kinds of mirrors to sort of shine the light upon this one thing. And if we leave the smallest opportunity to avoid looking at this one thing, our mind will take that gap. Our mind will take that sort of opportunity to continue to believe. So we have all these little sort of traps and pitfalls and mirrors set up in formal practice. And to some degree, when we come into Zen practice, the form seems totally ridiculous. Why on earth do they pay so much attention, or do they pay any attention to these kinds of things? Like, what consequence does this have? So I wanted to talk about a few sort of little details, because people are coming from the Tuesday sit where I'm just interested in having people sit down for a few minutes to just start to pay attention to their breath. And this sit is an opportunity to sit for a little bit longer and to actually experience the depth that's available through formal practice with a group of people who are actually really committed to creating this vessel, creating this laboratory for the investigation of this fundamental point. So one of the things that you notice right away, and it's in the email, it says, if you want to come to the Sangha Sunday Zendo, one of the things that you have to do is buy a black gi. And for many people who come to practice Zen, how much time do I have? 3 minutes.
6 minutes.
All right, 6 minutes. Okay. So there's a lot of things. I'm just going to ring down a bunch of rules. And I don't want you to look at them as rules, because what they are is mirrors. And it's not like it's good or bad. There's no heaven or hell for you to fall into except for your own experience in this tradition. So the rules I want to sort of talk about a little bit, I can talk about them en masse, I think, are we wear these gis, we wear this practice uniform. And when we come into the Zendo, there are certain officers who are responsible for things like timekeeping. The Jikajitsu, this is one that I wanted to mention. The Jikajitsu is responsible for timekeeping. And so the general rule in the Zendo is that nobody wears a watch. You don't bring a timepiece into the Zendo if you're not the Jikajitsu. And you can feel this sort of like struggle sometimes with these, wearing a gi, timepiece. Traditionally, you don't wear socks in the Zendo unless you're sick or old. And really, it's not even a matter of old. It's you're ill or are at risk of being ill. And so older people are generally more susceptible to illness, right? Things like making sure that your chant sheets are tucked under, that your sort of space is in order. As I said, one of the things is our mind is amazingly subtle, amazingly refined. And what we're doing here is we're trying to point our awareness, point our attention at this collection, at our habit of sort of making this thing that we call an I. And we use all kinds of things to sort of define that I, how we dress, and the control that we have over such things abstract, like time. We do it when we chant, we do it when we walk, how we walk, our pace, all of these kinds of things, the tone of our voice, the volume of our voice, And in Zen practice, everything that we do is aimed at pressing us up against what we prefer. I would rather be wearing something else. And this is a subtle thing. Maybe it doesn't happen when you come into the Zendo, but at home, when you're putting on this gi, there's this little, there's friggin' pajamas I gotta put on again, or vice versa. Look at this fancy robe that I get to put on. When we chant, we have this little internal wobble where we're like, oh, this chanting is weird, and what am I chanting, and what would so-and-so think if they saw me chanting? And that can sort of arise and diminish several times during just a single chanting of a single sutra. When we walk, we see over and over again that we're constantly having to sort of turn back into the dissolution, into the activity that's going on, walking. We start to think about ourselves and our situation and our experience, and we disconnect from the world that we're walking in, the life that we're living, and we walk back into this sort of bubble of me, inside and outside. And our practice is just to recognize that, to wake up to that, and to turn back into this activity of immersing ourselves in our origin, in this fundamental unification, emptiness, letting go of this collection of things that we call I, that we're so stuck on. Buddhism as liberation from suffering does not mean that we're going to come to a place where just nothing bothers us, where we don't get leg pain, where people don't say cruel things to us. But when we experience this fundamental origin through our practice, when we're walking as we are walking, what is missing? When we're sitting as we're sitting, is there anything that stands outside? When we've completely engaged in the activity of chanting, what more is there that we can sort of get to bring into it? There is this profound, thorough experience of satisfaction, completeness, fulfillment, wholeness that we can know for ourselves through these practices. And through engaging in this sort of technique, if you want to use that term, this form, we become more and more familiar with that as an experience, a home that we can access. It's with us all the time. When we're able to turn in, when we're able to return to what it is that we're doing fundamentally, we can have this experience of being complete, needing nothing, needing to avoid nothing, needing to run from nothing and chase after nothing. Linji uses this phrase, there's nothing to do, buji, having nothing to do. And it's the opposite of what I was talking about before, this tanha, like I need to do something about this, I need to get something, or I need to get rid of something. But to sit as you are, whatever you're doing, losing your job, dying, making love, and we experience those things, pleasant and unpleasant. We get accolades and we're ruthlessly criticized, and they can be pleasant and unpleasant. But it cannot touch this fundamental completeness. And so when in Buddhism we're talking about liberation from suffering, our normal state is that the sort of accolades, we feel I'm a bigger, better, more important thing. And when we're ruthlessly criticized, I'm no good after all. And so our whole lives are this sort of tumultuous sea of up and down. And whenever we're down, we're striving to be up. And when we're up, we're trying to avoid not going down. But as long as we're shackled to this thing that we call I, as long as we take me as being this thing, there's no way off. And so in Zen, through this form, through the investigation and collaboration with a teacher in koan practice in the Rinzai tradition, we focus this laser, this genuine attention at this thing that we call a self. This stickiness, this sort of fixation. And we allow it to open up. And we allow ourselves to experience our lives as already complete. Nothing to do, nowhere to go. There are activities happening all of the time. There are always tasks that we are engaged in. But within those, there is this fundamental adequacy. It is enough. We are already complete. There is nothing that increases the quantity fundamentally. There is nothing that diminishes the quantity fundamentally. And this is something that knowing is not enough. If we know it, if we just know that there is this place, then we want to chase it. We need to have it. We want it because we don't have it. And it just becomes another object that shackles us. But as we allow ourselves to experience what is already our own home, our origin, our lives are transformed. We're not led anymore by a desire for gain, fear of loss, running after something, running away from something else. We take a seat in stillness, emptiness, fundamental wisdom, and a life arises out of that. Our interactions arise out of that. It doesn't mean that we're going to get it right every time. Not at all. This realization is one component. The second is manifestation. Manifestation is a skill, a maturity. And this is why we have this form, so that as we deepen in our realization, we have opportunities, examples, ways of going about exploring manifestation, interaction, relationship from this basis of fundamental unity.
Thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.